Thank you, Greg. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panel. So I'd like to call up Ken Rashbaum, who's a partner at Barton LLP, and Bert Kaminski, who is the Chief Commercial Counsel at GE Digital. And I'll introduce them. So Ken Rashbaum advises multinational corporations and healthcare organizations in the areas of privacy, cybersecurity, and e-discovery. He counsels these organizations on information management and its compliance with federal, state, and non-US laws. Ken also prepares and negotiates contracts and license agreements and advises clients on cyber risk insurance and other information use safeguards. Ken is currently assisting the New Jersey Assembly in drafting a privacy and cybersecurity bill and is also an adjunct professor of law at Fordham Law School. So welcome, Ken.
Thank you.
And next is Bert Kaminski, who is Chief Commercial Counsel at GE Digital. Bert serves as Chief Commercial Counsel at GE Digital, as I said, where he advises all levels of business and executive management on a broad range of technology-related issues. Bert specializes in the industrial Internet of Things, cloud computing, and software licensing, including issues involving privacy, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and data science. Welcome, Bert. So, okay, great. It's first of all, thank you both for coming. I think it's nice that we have like two experts local here in the city that can come to an event like this. So, first of all, I think that privacy and security are two separate things, although they're tightly integrated. So, I think we're going to touch on both. But I'd really like to start with, as I mentioned in the opening comments, we're living in a new world, and while we've already seen issues with the web, with privacy and security, we see them on a daily basis, IoT just seems to exacerbate the problems that we see with web. So I'm curious about your insights into what do you think are the key differences when it comes to IoT? Where are the threats more severe?
Well, I think you said it best, which is that the attack space is larger. The threats can be more severe because you have more information distributed in more places. And we don't see necessarily all that much consideration being given to safeguarding it. As we see more devices developing, and we'll get into this during the course of the discussion, there is a need for greater safeguards around this, and the challenge for all of you is a way to put those safeguards in place that facilitate the growth of your business and don't impede it, that assist your expansion into your customer base rather than restrict it, and in a way that you can leverage to not only increase your customer base but increase your funding. And we'll talk about that in a little while.
Hi. Thank you for the kind introduction, Mitchell. By the way, I'll just tell everyone here, so Bert Kaminski from GE, anything I say is not representing GE or any of its customers, and may not even be my own opinion, so I'll just, depending on the question. So just get that out. So that was a great answer, Ken. I'd like to also say is that we're focusing on threats. So, but the reason that we're looking at it that way today is because of the resounding success and the resounding growth of IoT generally. The World Economic Forum is calling it the fourth industrial revolution. See, IoT is not just devices that interconnect, but it is also fueled by ubiquitous computing and cloud, artificial intelligence, robotics, and 3D printing, and all of this. So the growth has just been phenomenal. I've seen statistics out there that it's growing at a compounded annual rate of growth of between 15 and 30% annually. By 2020, there'll probably be between, again, different statistics, 30 to 50 billion connected devices, and each of those will have sensors. So there'll be trillions of sensors connected to billions of devices that are generating reams of data. And that's what starts making this different now. And with all of this great opportunity, contributing, as McKinsey says, to perhaps over $4 trillion to world GDP coming up in the next few years. All of this is great benefit, but also potential risk because of all this data. This recent statistics on data is that there's about 2.5 quintillion bytes of data being generated every day. Now, does anyone have a sense on how big a quintillion is? How many zeros? Anyone? No? He's thinking. 18 zeros every day. Now, there was a time where they said that the amount of data being generated in human history was, you've heard this before, I'm sure, in the last 2 years, more data created than prior in human history. That's been updated to say that the rate of data growth is doubling every 18 to 24 months. IBM is predicting that in 10 years, the amount of data that is growing, it'll double every 8 hours. So you've got huge amounts of data, but data is worthless unless you do something with it, and it has to be converted to information. And that's where IoT really comes into. What it does is it gets data at the edge, brings it through gateways, perhaps to cloud, or computes it on the edge and builds very, very deep insights. Now, I think one of the questions maybe that you were getting at is you talked about privacy, Mitchell, and then security. I will just say is just to kick off the discussion. So with all of this data, security is a big issue, and security is usually defined as confidentiality, integrity, availability, and more recently, resiliency. That's sort of the security. So you're securing physical and network assets. You're securing data, meaning it doesn't get to third parties. You're making sure that the data stays integral. It's not being corrupted. Privacy focuses on something a little bit different. Also, it doesn't get to third parties. But privacy also looks at the permissions and scope of use. Europeans consider privacy a fundamental human right. So privacy starts focusing on, sure, don't disclose it to third parties, but it is only used for certain purposes, for certain lengths of time. The permissions can be revoked. It is transparent to where it goes and that. I hope that defines the difference.
One other point is we've seen, Bert and I've been in this industry for a long time, a paradigm shift. Mitchell said privacy and security are two different things. He's absolutely right, but they're conflated now. You can have security without privacy, but these days you can't have privacy without security. And more of the governmental regulations are conflating the two. State regulations here, the General Data Protection Regulation in the EU, they are blurring the line between privacy and security. And the new state laws that are following what Europe has done are putting them together. California's law has that. New York's law for regulations for financial services has had it for a year now. The New Jersey data protection legislation that I'm working on has cybersecurity and privacy implications because data is information, and the information is increasingly to be controlled by the person about whom that information was created or who created the information.
So since you brought up legislation, I mean, you're obviously involved with the New Jersey legislation and familiar with other. So you know, one of the things that affects many industries is at the beginning of an industry, people talk about like, will it need to be regulated by government or can it be self-regulated through some sort of standards through the private sector coming together, forming standards, forming initiatives, forming other things, which we'll hear from the OTA later in this meeting. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, do you think that is the government in a place to regulate at this point?
Depends on the government. If you look at what Europe has done, for example, just like they were far ahead of any other region in the world in the prior privacy regime, they very much are now with the General Data Protection Regulation. They have caught the interest of the public in Europe, and something I never thought I would see in my career, American legislators, American executives are saying, Europe has a good idea. What a concept. Foreign law is something we can adopt. This is a sea change. This is a sea change. And the fundamentals of it, are simple to explain. The GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, has 99 articles, 151 recitals, and it's not exactly a model of clarity. It was written by people for whom English is not a first language, so it loses something in translation. But you can really sum it up in one sentence, and the sentence is this. Tell the data subject what you're doing with her personal information. Give her a say in it. Secure it, and only share it with people whom you trust. The rest is essentially commentary, but that's the theme. Do you have a say in what is happening with your data? Cambridge Analytica, what has just happened with Google, the most recent Facebook incident, the list goes on. And regulators and politicians listen to their constituencies. So that is really driving what they will do. At the state level, we're seeing a lot of very good things happening, taking into account what business needs and what startups need as well. This has been the pushback in New Jersey, the give and take. Are we creating regulations that can help business grow, or are we getting too close to the line where it's going to interfere? The sausage-making machinery is just starting. The first draft of the bill just came back. So I don't know what the final product is going to look like, but we are taking that very much into consideration.
If I could say, on Friday, David Reddle, who's the chief, he's within the Department of Commerce, within the National Telecommunications and Information Agency. He addressed this question of whether it should be security and IoT should be driven by government regulation, or should it be sort of industry groups coming up with standards. And his view is that, and really on behalf of the Department of Commerce, they'd rather see that when it gets to specific security regulations, the laws may outline general parameters, but the actual what to do specifically should be driven by industry, driven by stakeholders within in a policy-driven format. He believed that there is too much complexity in technology and in ecosystems like IoT. He also felt that the threat profile is changing so rapidly that if a government legislation was too proscriptive, it would be outdated and probably harmful in the long run. So so the U.S. government's much more supportive of industry creating standards that it should govern, self-regulating standards.
If anybody watched the Mark Zuckerberg hearings and saw the quality or lack thereof and sophistication or lack thereof of the questions, this should definitely give you cause for concern. On the other hand, what government regulation does, and to a great extent is, and I've seen this in healthcare, which is where I got my start in this space, is a driver for industry regulations. It gets the industry to wake up and say, wait a minute, if we don't do this, they're going to do it? Whoa. We know a whole lot more. We know we can keep up with the technology better. I heard a great quote today, which is that waiting for the law to catch up to technology is like waiting for Godot, except without the clowns. Yeah. So if the industry can regulate itself, great, but there are so many forces at play that mitigate against that. Speed, the need to grow, the need to accumulate and maintain capital. Sometimes that interferes. We've also seen that because of government regulation, the venture capital and private equity organizations are using those regulations to decide whom they're going to fund. If Andreessen hired Facebook's former privacy officers, going back before the recent stuff, to head its due diligence department. So when I have spoken to these groups before, I've asked people in the audience who's got their seed money. A lot of hands go up. Who wants to go to Series A? Everybody wants to go to Series A. Well, this is what they're looking for. Are you a good risk? Are you a good compliance risk? Sure. But compliance says a lot about whether or not you are taking your customer base's concerns seriously enough that you will be around and be able to thrive and grow.
So touching on something I think that Bert brought up, I mean, if we look at the kind of the timeline of technology in a way that, you know, we started out with very self-contained applications and programs running on one computer, maybe not even in the cloud, just on a computer in a mainframe or a mainframe. And then, you know, as time goes on, we have, you know, even in web, we have very complicated applications that draw on many APIs that interface with many applications. So in this latest Facebook hack, nobody really knows the implications yet because there were tokens that were stolen, and nobody knows if those tokens were used to access third-party application data, as far as I know. And so now we're entering an even, maybe third or fourth wave that will have all these devices that are collecting data. And as Bert mentioned, I mean, it's not the data, it's what you do with the data. So we have many different applications like analytics, IoT analytics, other things. So APIs, using APIs to transfer data from one application to another in order to increase the value. The question is, with all these devices on the edge, with all these different applications that are accessing the data in order to bring value to it, is this fundamentally at odds with privacy and security?
It's a tension for sure. I'll give you one example, and then I know you and I talked about this before. Bert and I have been on a number of panels together on this subject. John Hancock Insurance Company, one of the biggest carriers in North America, is now getting out of the traditional life insurance market. They will now require for their new life insurance policies that all insureds wear a Fitbit or similar tracking device. Yeah, that was my reaction. To send the data back to them, and they're going to monitor activity levels, and it's going to go to the actuaries to determine premiums. At least that's what.
Pardon me, but is subcontracting the Marshal Service?
Yeah.
No further questions, Your Honor. Yeah, so that is the pushback on it has been far less than I would have thought. What the state insurance departments do with it, I don't know, but is this a trend? Yeah.
The problem is a second or third, an ancillary effect.
Yeah, and actually, yeah, we'll go to questions at the end. If you want to save it for the end, maybe
Yeah,
it'll make the technology easier. Yeah, okay, hold the thought. Thanks.
But, you know, this is, if the industry is going in this way, if this is the harbinger, what thought is being given to your point, which is the uses of the information, to the places where it can go, where it shouldn't go, and what is the customer pushback? We saw Target's revenue drop, what, 40% after its hack, year to year? So there is a reputational injury that is palpable if you don't take care of the information. Bert?
So it actually could be consistent. Privacy and security and IoT can actually be mutually reinforcing. There is tension, but depending on the technology, it actually can provide more safety. So let's put it this way. As devices and the edge becomes more powerful, a few things are happening. You don't need to move some of that data to the cloud or out of the local area, or at least the local area network, what they can in some places call the fog node. And so you can have actually more localized data, and that would enhance security by not having data traverse various different gateways into third parties. Secondly, you can build in security at the edge or at the local node That can be more secure. Now, there's still technological challenges. Sensors are very low energy. They can't, there's some, we can talk about some of the issues. But frankly, there can be a convergence between a higher concern of security and privacy and the development of edge computing. And so it can actually enhance each other.
In fact, the GDPR has a requirement for something called privacy by design and default. There is a requirement that you bake privacy and security into your application. And somebody gave it some real good thought.
And so speaking of privacy by design, how do companies view this as anything? Of course, they know that it's important. They know they have to do it, but it's a cost center. How do companies view this?
The aspect of compliance as a cost center is less so in 2018. Most of my clients who have retained me and my firm for compliance are doing it not because they're afraid they're going to get penalized, not because they're afraid they're going to get sued, because their B2B customer base is insisting on it. Or they needed to answer a request for proposals, or they needed to answer a request for information, which means that it's not a cost center, it's a business investment. Meet these standards, more markets open up to you.
I also want to just say we are talking about this all in the context of information or personal information. There's another aspect which we may not focus on as much today, but remember that IoT is actually also in the industrial space where there may not be personal information that's really involved there. And there the risk is different. It's not a compliance issue, although some companies out there wish there would be some compliance-driven aspect to get more funding internally. But it is much more of an operational risk. For example, power plants going offline due to state actors' cybersecurity attacks, like in Ukraine, where in the middle of winter in December of 2015, a whole swath of Ukraine went dark because of an attack. If you ever have the chance, if you take a look at New York Magazine from a couple of years ago, it was called The Big Hack, and it outlined how a non-personal information IoT attack basically crippled New York City in every number of ways, from power to emergency services, and it's a sort of a chilling tale.
San Francisco with the Bart system not too long ago.
Yeah. So security also, we do refer to it as a compliance risk. We talk about personal information, but there is a cyber-physical aspect where real assets can be damaged, real economic costs, people's lives can be lost. So there's another way where companies are not just looking at from a customer standpoint. They don't want we don't want people to be killed.
I'll give you one example. Anybody here have Strava? Strava is I do too. I'm a cyclist. Strava will keep track of your run or your hike or your bike ride, depending on how you set it up. When it first came out, it was promoted heavily to the military. Some of you may know what happened. It picked up where some Marines were doing their patrols in Afghanistan at what was supposed to be a secret location. Nobody gave any thought to the security and potential, for lack of a better term, confidentiality aspects of this. And that's where I say the GDPR was so forward-thinking. Bake security and confidentiality into what you're doing. Keep it top of mind, not bolted on afterward.
Just out of curiosity, what can a person, let's say the individual, do when they're buying products or when they're looking at things? How can they be aware of or understand which products may have security issues, privacy issues?
That's tough to do because the information is not necessarily readily available to lay people. If you want to really scare yourselves, look at the end-user license agreement for the next app that you download. Whoa. Certain state laws and the GDPR are trying to push back against that, but that stuff is frightening. It basically says you own the data, but you give us a license to do anything and everything we want to do with it at our sole discretion and share it with whoever we want. Look at what just happened with Google, for example. There are some apps and platforms you can't do without, but with a new product, look into what it is doing, why it is doing it, and where the data will go to the extent that you can access that information. And sometimes you can actually call the support people and ask. Now, they have scripts they're reading off of the screens, mind you, but you're all in this industry. You can read between the lines. Think about whether this is a product that makes sense for you. Is it something that you'd want to do? Anybody here have the Amazon Echo? Yeah, a lot of us do, or the Dot, as the case may be. I have it. It's on mute most of the time when I'm not using it, when I remember to push the mute button, which I don't always do.
So actually, interesting point about pushing the mute button. If you as a consumer were very concerned about it, Mitchell, what I would say is that you look at the devices that allow you, giving you user controls, so that you can
great point.
stop the sharing of information, or that allow patchability or updates. What is the end of life of the product? Does it automatically disconnect from your network when not in use, or is it always connected? So there are some things that you can see. So just what is it? How much does it store locally? So if you really wanted to get into it, I would say is that you would find devices that you have more user controls to stop its sharing, turn it off, or that it goes dark by default, and the like.
I mean, there are definitely companies that are making it a point that their products are serving the public and that they take privacy very seriously, some more so than other companies. I mean, you see
That's
this.
kind of my point,
Yeah.
which is that privacy is a marketing device now. Who'd have thought this back in the days when Scott McNealy, the former CEO of Java, said, forget about privacy, it doesn't exist. Or when Mark Zuckerberg said a few years ago, words that have come back to haunt him, privacy is no longer a social norm. Well, guess what? He had something to do with that becoming more of a social norm. Arguably, that is now a marketing device. If you can promote, to your point, Bert, the user controls that can help you keep that information from potentially going where you don't want it to go, it is a marketing advantage. But one cautionary note, you can say what you do, but do what you say. Because one of the biggest regulatory risks in this country is still the Federal Trade Commission, where if you don't do what you say, that is considered a deceptive or unfair trade practice. And a number of companies in their relative youth have gone down because of very, very expensive Federal Trade Commission proceedings. The Federal Trade Commission's got some very large and barbed teeth. And if it sinks them into you, it's very hard to get out.
And it's not just even a question of that you're not, as if you're a product manufacturer, that you're not complying with the privacy policies that you've published. But if your device is inherently unsafe, that can be considered an unfair practice. And so there have been times where the FTC has gone after companies that have put out unsafe products.
Or products that, this is now being litigated, products that don't have good controls over where the data goes. That by itself has gone to the 11th Circuit, and the Federal Circuit courts differ over this as to whether that by itself is an unfair trade practice or not. The law is evolving in this area. It's very, very unsettled. I tell my students at Fordham that you're in a great place to go into this area because you can't read a textbook and see what the law is in privacy and cybersecurity. Your clients are saying not just what's the law now, but where will it be? How can I plan 2-3 years out if it's changing that rapidly? Advise me. Tell me what to do. There's only so many caveats you can give. So, as Wayne Gretzky once said, I don't score because I skate to where the puck is. I score because I skate to where the puck will be. And that's what the clients are looking for from their counsel and their technical advisors.
So as IoT is developing, and we heard the numbers, 2025, it's going to be 30 to 50 billion devices. Where do you see that the puck is going to be? I mean, what do you think is going to happen with respect to law, regulation, maybe industry standards?
Well, the states now are the laboratories in this area. We've got California's new Privacy Act, Vermont's, Colorado's, New Jersey, I said, is in gestation, New York's regulations, Ohio. These are not just blue states, by the way. This is, for the most part, a nonpartisan issue. Nobody wants to stand up in the well of the Senate, believe it or not, and say, I think privacy over my bank account is a terrible idea, and there should be no controls whatsoever. That's a non-starter. Nobody's getting elected on that platform. All right. So what we're seeing the states move, we're seeing industry pushing back, and that's the federal preemption move that's going on now. There are hearings going on right now in Washington for federal privacy law, which those of us in this space have been advocating about for years, but not because we need a stronger privacy law like Europe or South America or parts of Asia where privacy is a fundamental right. It's because they're afraid the states are going to be very strict on regulation, and they want a low baseline federal law that will preempt or supersede state laws. Out of this Congress, I'm not terribly optimistic anything's going to happen soon. I think the states are going to respond to their own citizens and pass their own laws, and we're going to have a patchwork for a while. But the way to keep track of all this, there are common themes among all of these laws. Disclosure, transparency, doing what you say you will do, safeguarding the information, reporting quickly when it's breached. Those are a couple of the common themes that are throughout all states. Industry will follow along. A lot of states are putting what they call safe harbors in. If you meet certain standards for documented security plans like the ISO 27000 series, or SOC 2 or SOC 3, or HIPAA, or certain SEC under Regulation SP. If you're a public company, you may be exempt from having to meet certain other requirements. ISO is not a government standard, really. It's, in effect, an industry standard. SOC 2 and 3 are as well.
Just to address one of your comments, the patchwork comment, I mean, the U.S. is a huge monolithic market. I mean, that's one of our advantages, and with a lot of spending power. So if we have this patchwork of law, how does that affect a company that's trying to ship, a general product to 50 states?
Well, can I just jump in real fast? So, it's just when California is enacted this law, that's essentially going to become a national standard. So I think that's maybe the baseline. So I didn't want to.
No, you're right. I tell my European clients, we have to be concerned about 28 jurisdictions in the European Union. You all have to be concerned about 52. If you count Puerto Rico and the District of Columbia, right? And they're all different. The way to do it, as I said, is look for the common themes and try to get as close to the mark as you can. I know this gentleman's had a couple of questions that he's...
Yep, we'll get to those in just a minute. So just in terms of thinking, and we've touched on a number of things, in terms of thinking of practical advice for companies that are building IoT devices, IoT software in the industrial sector or for commercial, what are your thoughts? What are some practical words of wisdom?
Okay, so I would say for any company, and if we're talking consumer goods or so, you look at what the regulators are concerned with. Look at what the FTC and what the Europeans are going after, and it usually is a few key things. From a security standpoint, it is going to be that you can do software patching. So make sure that the operating systems of the units can be updated. Make sure that there's an end-of-life policy when it comes to devices. Start putting encryption. Stop hardwiring default passwords that can't be changed. From a privacy standpoint, be more transparent in terms of what sort of data you're collecting, and what you're doing with it. Make sure that you can get consumers to read that and affirmatively click I accept when they buy a new device. What else, Ken?
Map your data flows. What data are you generating? What data are you receiving? Where is it going? How long do you keep it, and what are the different places that you keep it? With whom do you share it, and why do you share it with these people? Are they trustworthy? These are all the questions that your customer base is going to ask, and test your security. Get people to come in and do vulnerability assessments and penetration tests. This is the best way not only to document what you've got and where it's going, but to also assure yourselves that you have something that is secure, or be able to fix what isn't before the product is released.
Data minimization also. Don't collect what you don't need, and don't keep it longer than you need to keep it. Now, that may conflict a little bit with some of this attention when it comes to analytics, and companies like to grab more analytics. But really, the trend is now that it's no longer viewed as that you can collect huge data lakes, and it gets to a question of whether consumers are even consenting to that. So be sure is that really the trend is in Europe and California. Keep the amount of data as minimal as possible. Maybe you keep it at the edge. Delete data that you don't need, and make sure you get consents for purposes of use.
Oh, one more thing. It takes a village. Bring the business people in to talk to all of you, all right? Because you may feel like Bert does, and I do, and Mitchell does, get rid of the things you don't need. The business groups may say, but we need these data. Here's why we need them. Try to come up with a good setup that will meet the requirements of the business units, as well as the operations developers, as well as the financial people. It's holistic. It can't be done by just one discipline.
Very complicated trade-offs.
Yes. Oh, extremely. There's language difficulty for nothing else. But, one of the things that I like to do when I come in as outside counsel is I put together a compliance group where I bring in people from all these different disciplines who normally wouldn't talk to each other except when they see each other in the cafeteria. And we kind of break down silo walls that way.
Great. I think we'll move to some questions. We certainly had some in the audience. So I think what I'll do is I'll bring around a mic. First introduce your name.
Bob Gezelter. One of the observations is derivative information. The classic story of how you estimate Apple's production capacity when they won't tell it is count the trucks. In industrial IoT, there's innumerable ways to analyze performance data from devices and back into a whole host of things if you're willing to spend the analytical time. So the problem becomes not so much who has the data, but what you can do with it in ways that people might not anticipate. For example, you mentioned the target data breach. I would suspect from a privacy point of view, the worst problem was the article in the New York Times Magazine subsequent to that about the analytics episode, where they predicted pregnancy based on purchase receipts. Quite effectively, unfortunately, they disclosed a couple of pregnancies that were not known to the people in the household.
Yes.
Because the card was daddy's card, and well, I think the exact phrase in the article was, the father said, I was not aware of all the activities that had been going on under his roof. Oops. There's a huge disclosure issue of incidental disclosure through analytics of things that seem innocuous.
And that's going to be hard for any industry group or regulator to keep up with.
Agreed. That's the challenge.
In the past, just very briefly, personal information was your name and social security number.
Yeah.
And now it has grown into biometrics. The chief of the CIA says you can identify a single individual within 300 million people of the United States by just how the gait of their walk.
Yes.
And that's and so now personal information has become much broader, which is leading to that issue.
I'm going to start the question posted this way. My name is Alvaro Neira, by the way. Is legislature for privacy and security, IoT, too important to be left to legislators and to lawyers? The real question is because the gap, when you look at people like, like people in the government, in the media, and they speak, and you look at the amount of data, the value of the transactions, on the effect on the economy and on individual companies, is anybody doing any kind of strategy or game playing of the effect of legislature, or, like the example that he mentioned, and innumerable examples on how all the pieces will fit together, so that you're making legislature based on the effect that will have, and less so on influence, like a traditional government, good old boys or girls or whatever, things of that nature.
Yeah, I would say, Ken, you may be experiencing that in the state of New Jersey with what you're working on. Is there a sort of an analytical, statistical approach to creating these laws? And
Not yet. It's a great suggestion. I know that there were hearings with people who came with that approach in Europe. California had that as well. We're in very early days in New Jersey. We just got the first draft back from the Office of Legislative Services. I was editing it this morning before I came here. It has not yet been formally sponsored. But you're spot on. No, it's not best left to lawyers by any stretch of the imagination. Certainly not to politicians. But that's how laws get made in this country and in most countries. So we need well-informed people who will open up hearings to those who have that kind of expertise, and listen to their staffs as well, and really give it some thought, so you don't get questions like asked of Mark Zuckerberg: how do you make money if you don't charge for the service?
Right, but the stakes are very high now.
Of course. Of course. The question in the back?
Hi, Michael DeBenny. I'm an investor, and I wanted to get some comment on the self-regulation aspect. My cyber insurance policies will not cover anything. So essentially, they're putting it back on businesses to say, you have to self-insure because you can't get coverage, you can't get addendums. So is industry going to take the step up? What industry, or are we going to go back to the lobbying that we talked about before, or the politics and the lawyers writing these kind of things? I don't really know if business is going to take the first step, even though they should.
Business won't take the first step. And your point about the cyber insurance is a good one. I spend an awful lot of my days reviewing cyber insurance policies for clients and talking to underwriters about what risks they won't underwrite. But so there are 60 different insurance carriers writing cyber insurance, and 60 different forms of policy. So sometimes you can get coverage and sometimes you can't, but a lot of it depends on your application and what you say your business is doing. Will industry lead it? Probably not, but industries as a whole will lead the initiative, because they're the ones developing the tools and the data that we're using. Healthcare was the first to do this back in the late 90s with HIPAA.
And just one comment that we're gonna hear a lot more about that in the next segment. So stay tuned for that. Yeah, we have a question
Michael
about it.
Elling. I'm a consultant and entrepreneur analyst. GE has the Predix platform, which you're probably familiar with. Put a lot of money into it, a lot of marketing behind it. There are many, many other similar type of initiatives at many other companies. And I'm wondering, GE with its size and, say, competitors like Siemens, if you were to get together and create some of these interoperability standards, wouldn't that be a driving force that would be more powerful than any type of regulation, state or other actor?
I think the companies are. I'm not. I have to say, I'm not going to speak exactly what GE is doing, but I do believe a lot of these companies are getting together and are doing just that. I do know their initiatives. I can't name one off the top of my head, but they are coordinating. I think that's what companies really want to do, because it's really the companies that are in the industrial IoT space understand it best, and they want to be able, and frankly, the regulators want to know. They want to be proposed to. of what should they really come up with, because they don't really want to come up with it just out of the blue. So they are looking to industry to make proposals, and I'm sure that's happening. I can't think of one I can mention right now.
I can think of one, PCI DSS. PCI DSS, the credit card industry got together and created its own set of standards because they had so much vulnerable information that wasn't really being safeguarded, and now we have a pretty good set of standards.
Okay, we'll take one last question, and then we'll go into the next segment.
You mentioned a lot about holistic viewpoints and bringing in multi-stakeholders. When you look at things, for example, like how MetLife wants to do Fitbits on everybody, what I wonder is if one of the, like I always think about unintended consequences of policy, for example. So if we look at why people are unhealthy, most of the times like mental health, things like that, do you see maybe, for example, insurance companies also boosting like coverage for that kind of thing, or even holistic healthcare, and other industries being like, oh, we also have to take a more holistic approach if we're going to be looking at risk this way?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly the other side of it. You know, you have to look at this with perspective, kind of holding it up and turning it around many different ways. No simple answers here. And there are unintended consequences for sure. So the state approach is a little bit easier than doing something on the federal level because the states have a little bit more latitude in what they can do, and it's a smaller laboratory. You don't need as much time. You have political considerations for sure. I'm seeing them now in New Jersey, but they aren't as profound as what we have been seeing in Washington. So I think that with the industry groups informing the state legislatures, to the extent the state legislatures are willing to listen, which happened to a great degree in California, I think we can accomplish something that will allow the IoT industry to thrive and grow and develop and still be good stewards of people's personal information.
Yeah, I would add to that, and that was great, is that sure, as what companies do in IoT will probably inform and help evolve this legislation in the future based on the insights that are gleaned from data. So you mentioned like mental health. It's possible that IoT and AI running on that can find patterns in people's behavior, what's healthy and what's not healthy, and that could look to change some of the legislation and industry practices going forward. We just don't know it now because we just didn't gather the data and run the analytics on it. So that's what makes this technology so powerful, and how the laws will also evolve based on where the technology takes us.
Great. Thank you for this elucidating panel. Bert Kaminski and Ken Rashbaum, thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you, Mitchell.